when I was a youth, it was very different for us because we lived off the land a lot of the time unless we were in school. And now, the way the youth are living, they're living more in the community and they're not getting out on the land nearly as much as we did as young people. And they have a lot of expectations, but they're not well educated because the dropout rate in the north is very high. Which brings us to what has been one of your major concerns in the 6 years you occupied this position, and that's the challenge of education. The dropout rate is what? It's almost 75%. That's right. Yes, from high school. Right. This is not even post-secondary education. When the Prime Minister apologized in the House of Commons for the residential school abuses that took place between, you know, the educators of the time and the Aboriginal peoples, which included both the First Nations, Inuit and Métis people, I came out of that apology thinking that the words that were spoken had to mean something to the people. So our board, we discussed this, and I felt that it should be about education. That it was the right time to start talking about what kind of education we want for our people. And it's a long-term project. It's not going to happen overnight, but at least over the past 2 years, I've worked as a national chair for this national committee that includes all the territorial governments, the school boards, and the federal government, and they all signed an accord giving ITK the mandate to do this work. So we've come up with a document called First Canadians, Canadians First, a national strategy for Inuit education. And what we did was we looked at how well the children were doing in school. And there wasn't a lot of data to work from. But we knew from past discussions over the years that there were certain gaps that weren't being met. So it was not about throwing away the education system. It was about looking at the areas that have worked for us and the areas that haven't worked for us, and to revitalize the education system in such a way that our education system will be grounded in our mother tongue, which is Inuktitut, with different dialects, and that the curriculum is to be developed in the Inuit language so that our children can be taught in their mother tongue. There's a lot of reports, and especially the UN report caught my eye a few years ago, that said that if a child can be taught in their mother tongue, they're more likely to succeed in school. And right now we teach up to grade 3, but once you get past grade 3, then you have to switch to English, or in our case in Quebec, we can switch to English or French. So the child suddenly switches to another language, and that's where some of the weaknesses lie, I think, in terms of how we provide education to our children. How are you progressing in trying to change that? The strategy has been endorsed now by all the leaders in the North, including the federal government, and it has 10 very specific recommendations. And we also caught the eye of the private sector, because we knew that the money that we would need in order to do what we want would not be able to come only from governments. So we started talking to the private sector in southern Canada, and in fact I had a roundtable here in Ottawa with 10 or 12 CEOs, and we've been able to garner some great support from these corporate companies, and we've had. Some of them are going to need your help. Well, that's the north, right? Yeah, the workforce is in the north. Like the population is not that, you know, high in terms of the numbers. Inuit, what, 55,000? Yeah, 55,000, but over 50% of the population of Inuit is under the age of 25. So can you imagine the workforce that is there? If they were well educated and had a good grounding in their culture and their language, they would make up a really strong workforce for a lot of different companies that want to work in the north. And in fact, this workforce should be seen as a workforce for the rest of Canada. You know, we're not so isolated that people don't want to move to other areas other than their community, and they should be afforded the opportunity to do so if they want to.
It's a similar argument you hear from leaders of other First Nations. The AFN is making that same argument, or expressing the same concern about the education of the Erie.
Yes, it's very much the same. I'm not sure exactly what recommendations they're coming up with, but one of the things that we are addressing is there's 3 priorities that were identified as critical beginnings of the strategy, and that is we want the parents to be more involved in their children's education. The children don't get enough support from their parents to stay in school. So we're going to have a campaign across the Arctic to encourage parents to get involved in their school, and it could be done different ways. In fact, we've been talking about, for instance, literacy programs with the Paul Martin Foundation, where parents could come to the school and learn to read and write themselves, the ones that haven't been able to do that. And then they start to feel more comfortable in the school setting, and they also get to know the teachers. And then they start to get more involved and encourage their children to stay in school. That's one aspect of it, and it is a very important aspect of it. Because if I didn't encourage my children to go to school, I don't know whether they would have gone to where they are today. So I think that's a very sort of a starting point. The other one is early childhood education. We want the early childhood education to be linked to the grade school system, because in the north we're finding that there are a lot of learning disabilities amongst our kids. It can be caused for any number of things, like it could be a language barrier, it could be a hearing problem, because you know there's been a lot of hearing otitis issues in the north. It could be FASD related, but if the early childhood education can help us identify a child that has a learning problem, by the time they get into grade school, that child will be better equipped, and the teachers will be better equipped to know where that child should go.